Growing up beneath a stern roof. In a quiet corner of western Texas, Mary and Emily Parker spent their childhoods in a modest, sun-bleached house at the end of Willow Lane. Life under their father, Antonio Parker, was governed by strict rules and an unwavering sense of discipline. Antonio, a first-generation Italian-American, brought with him traditions and expectations rooted deep in his upbringing: responsibility, respect for authority, and absolute loyalty to family. For Mary and Emily, these principles often felt more like chains than guidance. The girls' daily lives followed a rigid schedule. Mary, 2 years older, would rise before dawn to help their father prepare for his demanding job at the refinery. Meanwhile, Emily tended to household chores under their mother's watchful eye. Schoolwork had to be flawless, grades exemplary. Anything less led to hours of stern lectures delivered in Antonio's sharp, accented English. Laughter and play belonged to the rare moments when their father was away on night shifts. Outwardly, the Parker house sparkled with order. Yet inside, tension pressed down like the relentless Texan heat. Arguments between their parents about money and the pressures of fitting into American society often echoed late at night. Mary, ever the protector, would pull Emily close under the shared covers, whispering stories to drown out the angry voices drifting up from the kitchen. Childhood for the Parker sisters was a lesson in silently enduring and quietly rebelling. Mary learned to challenge boundaries in subtle ways. An extra hour reading after lights out, whispered secrets in the backyard, a rebellious streak hidden behind good grades. Emily developed sensitivity and patience, finding small pockets of comfort in music and the gentle rituals she shared with their mother. The sisters relied on each other to navigate the household's volatility. Their father's affection was rare and unpredictable. Sometimes a proud smile at a report card. Other times, a silent nod after a job well done. In those brief, golden moments, the girls imagined a different life, one filled with freedom and warmth rather than rigid responsibility. Looking back, Mary and Emily's partnership as children was forged in adversity. Each learned to be both shield and shelter for the other, clinging together whenever the world outside and the man inside their home became too much to bear. Their bond was their first promise. Together, they could endure anything, a vow against oppression. It was on one of those heavy, storm-soaked Texas nights that Mary and Emily made a promise to each other, a vow whispered in the dim glow of a shared bedroom clock, just after midnight. The storm outside rattled the windows, but inside, the only sound that mattered was their father's footsteps fading down the hallway and the soft, anxious breathing of two sisters huddled close under a worn quilt. Mary, still not quite a teenager, had seen enough to steel her resolve. She wrapped her arm protectively around Emily, her tone low and earnest. No matter how hard he gets, no matter what rules he sets, we won't let him break us. We're in this together. The words hung in the dark, more powerful than any prayer. And Emily nodded, her trust in Mary as solid as the oak tree in their backyard. From that night on, the sisters carried their secret alliance like a badge. Whenever Antonio's temper flared or his expectations grew impossible, Mary would catch Emily's eye, a silent pact flashing between them. She'd slip a comforting note into Emily's lunchbox or distract their father with small talk to draw fire away from her younger sibling. Emily, for her part, learned to recognize the subtle tremor in Mary's voice that signaled exhaustion or worry, and would quietly leave her favorite cookie on Mary's pillow or hum a gentle tune when tension ran high. This vow did not eliminate their fear, but it gave them the courage to face it. Both sisters learned to weather their father's storms as a united force, supporting each other through missed curfews, strict punishments, and the relentless pressure to be perfect daughters. Their promise transformed into countless small acts of rebellion, an extra 15 minutes at the library after school, secret notes stashed under floorboards, and, above all, unwavering emotional support. More than just a defiance against their father's iron rule, this sisterly vow became the soil in which their resilience grew. Together, Mary and Emily shaped their shared world into one of quiet resistance. The threat of disappointment or anger, so crushing in isolation, became manageable when split between them. As they moved into their teenage years, the vow evolved. It no longer belonged just to the frightened girls beneath their covers, but to young women learning to assert themselves in the classroom, in friendships, and eventually in the choices that would shape their adult lives. The memory of that rain-soaked promise became a touchstone. Whenever life became overwhelming, they each remembered the night they chose to be more than victims of circumstance. It was the strength of this vow that would later define both their loyalty and the heartbreak to come when the spotlight flared. As the sisters grew, the world around them widened and complicated in ways neither could have expected from the confines of Willow Lane. High school marked the beginning of divergence. Mary, ever ambitious, pushed herself relentlessly. Captain of the debate team, excelling academically, and volunteering weekends at the county courthouse. Emily, meanwhile, moved quietly through her days. Gifted in music, gentle with friends, and steadfast in the routines that brought her comfort. After high school, their choices set them on paths that would only widen the gulf between them. Mary won a scholarship to a prestigious university in Austin, intent on law. Even as she packed her bags, she saw the glimmer of both pride and apprehension in her father's eyes. Emily remained behind in their hometown, attending a local community college and helping their mother with the household as Antonio's health began to falter. When Emily played piano late at night, almost always when she thought no one was listening, her music became a silent commentary on longing, loss, and hope. Mary's ascent. In Austin, Mary thrived in the rough and tumble world of pre-law. She had learned, in her father's house, how to withstand pressure and keep secrets. Now she used those lessons to build alliances, outmaneuver rivals, and distinguish herself from classmates who underestimated her small-town origins. Professors praised her sharp mind and steely resolve. Classmates respected her tenacity, even as they resented her competitiveness. During internships, Mary's discipline and poise impressed partners at a prominent Houston law firm. By age 27, she was one of the youngest trial lawyers ever hired by the legendary firm Peterson and Gold. Dazzling juries with her clarity and focus, her Italian-American background, and the echoes of a hard-edged Texan childhood became part of the narrative she spun for herself and others. The girl from nowhere, who bent adversity to her will. Mary's rise brought benefits her family had never known. Invitations to black-tie galas, holiday bonuses that paid for new appliances at home, and the sort of respect her father had craved his entire life. Antonio, though aging, showed flashes of pride, and her mother boasted softly to neighbors about her daughter, the attorney. Mary bought her parents a new car for their anniversary and sent Emily care packages stuffed with books and fancy teas. Emily's quiet shadows. Back home, Emily's world retained its smaller scale. the banks of the local river, the steady rhythm of work at the First Western Bank, the rituals of Sunday dinners with their parents. She was well liked at work, admired for her diligence and warm manner, but was never the center of attention. Emily's music, the piano that she had loved since childhood, became both a comfort and a subtle form of self-expression. Sometimes, locals would hear her playing at the old Methodist church after hours, her melodies gentle and reflective. While Mary's return visits were less frequent, the sisters kept up their childhood ritual of swapping late-night texts. "How's the world out there? Same old, same old. Yours?" These messages became signals, sometimes islands, in the growing distance. Emily watched Mary's life unfold through social media. Photos at courthouse steps, interviews on the local news, growing circles of friends and colleagues. She liked every post, even if the ache of separation gnawed at her. Cracks beneath the pride. Mary's rise to success was not without cost. The law demanded her nights and weekends, her early mornings and holidays. The endless need to prove herself, to partners, to clients, to an imagined audience of doubters, left her both proud and restless. Success was sweet, but loneliness gnawed at her edges. Her victories in courtrooms in the boardroom were often followed by evenings spent alone with takeout and silence, the city's lights pulsing dimly outside her apartment window. Emily felt the changes at home more keenly. When Antonio's health took a sudden downward turn, she bore the brunt of caretaking while balancing work. Their mother, anxious and overwhelmed, leaned heavily on Emily's patience and gentle touch. Over the years, small slights accumulated. Missed birthdays, Mary's last-minute cancellations. The sense that Emily's struggles went unseen amidst the family's pride in Mary's dazzling ascent. At every holiday dinner, Mary's stories sparkled and drew the family's attention, while Emily retreated into the background, dutifully passing dishes and smiling at the right moments. A barely perceptible line began to form between them, a mix of admiration, envy, gratitude, and resentment that neither could quantify or voice. Public recognition, private distance. Mary's high-profile victories in Houston garnered local press and even invitations to speak at the university she'd attended. She was photographed with the city's elite, quoted on legal panels, and briefly profiled in a business magazine as one of Texas's rising stars. The Parker family collected and displayed these articles, careful not to spoil their edges. Back in their hometown, Emily listened as neighbors recounted Mary's deeds, always with pride in their voices, as though Mary's accomplishments belonged, in a way, to the whole community. Emily smiled and nodded, proud, but also uneasy, as townfolk jostled to shake Mary's hand at Thanksgiving or parish events. Emily learned to position herself just out of the frame, kindness masking her growing sense of estrangement. Yet for all the glory, Mary missed the easy confidence of her sister's affection. On one rare trip home, after the holiday meal had been cleared and their mother was fussing in the kitchen, Mary sat beside Emily, searching her eyes for traces of the old closeness. They talked, stilted, cautious, as if neither quite remembered the script of their childhood. Turning points, the change, like most pivotal turns, did not happen suddenly. Instead, it came in small exchanges. A well-intended gift that fell flat, a story retold so often it became a myth, a lingering silence on the phone when the conversation brushed too close to disappointment. Emily stopped playing piano as often. Mary stopped asking if she could come watch. As Antonio's health worsened, the focus of the family quietly shifted to issues of inheritance and legacy. Mary began, seemingly without thought, to direct conversations about their father's will insurance, and property. It was second nature for a woman who lived in the world of contracts and clauses. But for Emily, it was another, sharper sign that her contributions and care were invisible, brushed aside beneath Mary's confidence and expertise. Resentment, almost indistinguishable from sadness, grew. Emily felt her childhood vow to stand with Mary stretched thin. Mary sensed, but could not articulate, a shift in Emily's voice. Cool, reserved, sometimes distant. Fleeting connections, sometimes in the liminal hours after a fight or a tense family conversation, the sisters felt the urge to reach out, to apologize, to offer comfort. But pride and weariness won. Night after night, the texts became sporadic, then perfunctory. Each promised to try harder, but the space between them grew. In Houston, Mary sometimes found herself driving aimlessly after late meetings, parking in empty lots where the Texas skyline shimmered beneath the city lights. She would remember the warmth of her sister's laugh, the hush of Willow Lane, the promise of youth, and wonder if the price of her success had always been this inevitable. In their hometown, Emily worked late at the bank, her melodies at the church becoming less frequent, her world contracting to a set of careful, repetitive motions. She loved her family, missed her sister, and nursed a hope that somehow the distances could be overcome. But as her mother grew more dependent and her father's decline became inexorable, Emily's quiet resilience settled into resignation. The dawn after glory, when Antonio's illness reached its final stages, the stage was set for old wounds to manifest openly. Mary, now an established attorney and public figure, returned home, bearing both gifts and baggage. Emily, grounded in the routines she had forged and the sacrifices she had made, braced herself for the coming storm, a reckoning between sisterly pride, family duty, and the unspoken hurts that years of praise and oversight had sown. As the spotlight on Mary grew brighter, the shadow it cast upon Emily and the space between them was too large to ignore. And so, beneath the surface of achievement and admiration, Mary and Emily prepared for the test that would reveal what remained, not only of their shared promise, but of their bond as sisters. The first cracks beneath the surface of family rituals and holiday photos. The subtle fracture between Mary and Emily grew wider. It started small, almost imperceptible, like a tiny fissure in the foundation of their childhood home. But as the sisters, now adults, navigated the shifting tides of illness, responsibility, and the looming question of inheritance, the crack became impossible to ignore. Their father, Antonio, by now a shadow of the imposing man he once was, became the new center of gravity in the Parker household. The house they'd grown up in grew quieter and more cluttered with reminders of decline. Pill bottles lined up on the kitchen counter, a walker by the living room chair, the persistent scent of antiseptic masking the familiar aroma of their mother's cooking. Both sisters felt the weight of their father's mortality, yet each responded in ways that betrayed their growing emotional distance. Conversations that stung. Decisions about care and legacy fell naturally to Mary. She was, after all, the voice of reason and the bearer of the family's external pride. She'd show up in crisp suits for weekend visits, effortlessly slipping into the role of counselor, analyzing insurance policies, managing paperwork, and speaking to doctors. The family needed her clarity and drive, but in her efficiency, Mary sometimes swept past Emily's quieter contributions. She never meant it as a slight, but the sting was real. Emily felt her world constricting. While her sister negotiated over legal details, Emily sat through long evenings with their father, listening to the wheeze of his breath, matching her patience to his slow stories and unpredictable moods. She paid the bills, cooked the meals, and handled emergencies that never made the family group chat.
Welcome.
These acts were invisible and unglamorous.
Glad you could make it.
Gratitude, when it came, was fleeting. A distracted nod, a mumbled thanks as Mary dashed back to Houston. When they sat together at the kitchen table, the old warmth was gone. Their conversations, once filled with laughter or idle dreams, turned dense with subtext. Emily would mention doctor's appointments or rising expenses. Mary would respond with a brisk solution or another question, rarely with simple understanding. Each exchange closed a door they no longer realized needed opening. Arguments in the shadows. The first real fight came sooner than either expected. It happened late one night, after a hospital scare. Their mother had fallen asleep in an armchair, exhausted by a day of waiting rooms, intense updates. In the quiet kitchen, Mary and Emily faced each other, voices low but heated. "I can handle Dad's medical bills," said Mary, not unkindly, but with a clipped finality. "We just need access to his account." "You mean your account?" Emily interrupted, the bitterness uncharacteristic but sharp. "You always speak like I'm not even here." Mary drew a slow breath. "Emily, it's more complicated than you think. Some of these forms, I read them too, Mary. I'm not a child. I'm the one here every single day." Anger and old pain mixed in the silence that followed. Mary pressed her lips together, unable to concede. Emily, trembling, wrapped her arms around herself, and the moment passed with nothing resolved. It was the first time the sisters openly questioned each other's motives, not out of malice, but out of exhaustion and the old, raw need for acknowledgement, inheritance, and suspicion. As Antonio's health faltered further, the specter of inheritance, property, savings, family keepsakes, began to dominate discussions. Mary, turning naturally to spreadsheets and contracts, proposed hiring a financial advisor to plan for fair division. But the proposal sounded to Emily like another way of being edged out. She worried, not entirely without reason, that decisions would be made around her rather than with her. She began checking the mail more closely, asking pointed questions about bank statements, and recalled, resentfully, the ease with which Mary navigated the official world. One rainy afternoon, Emily found a thick envelope addressed to Mary from a law firm. Her heart pounded. That night, she brought it up at the dinner table. "What are you planning, Mary? About Dad's will?" Mary, caught off guard, bristled. "I was clarifying a few details. It's just routine." Emily's glare spoke volumes. After all these years, she still felt on the outside of whatever power Mary wielded so effortlessly. Old hurts bubbled to the surface. Memories of childhood teachers asking, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" Of Mary's trophies, imperfect report cards displayed on the mantel. Of a household quick to praise achievement and slow to notice kindness. Family tensions constituted the rift did not go unnoticed. Their mother, exhausted and increasingly frail, began trying, unsuccessfully, to mediate. She would try to speak to both, gently urging Mary to slow down and listen to your sister, and telling Emily, "Your sister means well. She just wants what's best." But even these maternal interventions missed the point. It wasn't about money, not really. It was about the accumulation of small wounds. Phone calls ended too soon, gestures overlooked, assumptions made and never checked. The sisters no longer confided in each other. Every conversation was cautious. Every family meal carried an invisible script of rivalry. Relatives visiting from out of town added fuel to the fire with well-meaning but ill-phrased comments. Mary, You're so impressive now. Emily, you must be grateful for all she's doing. Emily's polite laughter grew quieter with each gathering. A new chill winter came early that year. Antonio's health declined rapidly, and the sisters' roles grew even more defined. Mary, the negotiator and provider. Emily, the caretaker and unseen pillar. The distance between them felt as cold and permanent as the frost on the old persimmon tree outside their childhood bedroom. Some nights, Emily tried to rekindle their closeness, texting Mary photos from old albums, or inviting her to drive by the high school football field where they'd once cheered at games. Mary's replies were invariably brief, distracted, full of commitments and ticking clocks. Once, Mary arrived late to a crucial doctor's appointment, walking into the hospital room still on a conference call. Emily said nothing, just gathered her purse and left early that afternoon. From then on, her updates to Mary grew shorter, more formal. The ease that once marked their exchanges was gone. Unspoken fears, unspoken blame. Both sisters nursed private fears. Mary worried she was being accused of loving her family with ambition. Emily wondered if she was being punished for lacking brilliance. In their own ways, each blamed the other for a growing sense of loss. One night, as their father slept and their mother dozed in a nearby chair, the sisters sat together in the darkened kitchen, neither speaking. Emily wanted desperately to reach out, to confess her doubts and her jealousy, to ask Mary if she was really going to take everything. Mary, her thoughts tangled by guilt and pride, wanted to explain that she felt just as alone as Emily did, just as afraid, but no words came. Instead, the silences between sentences grew heavier. The memory of their childhood vow, "We're in this together," felt impossibly far away, foreshadow of what's to come. The first cracks in the Parker sisters' bond were quiet, but seismic. The next phase would not simply test their love. It would force them to reckon, for the first time, with the true limits of loyalty, resentment, and forgiveness. Betrayal and the sweetest revenge. Some betrayals arrive with a thunderous crash. Others slip in quietly, disguised by years of patience and a soft, tired smile. For the Parker sisters, it was the former built slowly from the latter, a culmination of tiny grievances, ignored sacrifices, and invisible scars that finally found their moment to rupture. A shattering discovery. It began, as tectonic shifts in families often do, with a single, accidental discovery. One pale Sunday morning, Emily was sorting the mail as usual when she spotted a heavy, velvet-textured envelope bearing the letterhead of Peterson and Gold, the very law firm Mary worked for in Houston. Her curiosity edged into unease. Though she had always trusted her sister, years of barely restrained tension had honed her instincts for secrets. Inside the envelope, Emily found a thick set of legal documents, some of which referenced transfers, trusts, and asset protection plans, signed not with the family's collective names, but by Mary alone. The meticulous notes in the margin, Mary's handwriting, detailing distribution scenarios and holding companies, felt both foreign and intimately familiar. Emily's face flushed hot with a mix of fear and betrayal. A part of her wanted desperately to believe there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe Mary was just making sure their father's medical expenses were covered. Maybe it was a draft, a just in case, nothing more. But the specifics, the details clearly favoring Mary's signature and interest, made it impossible to ignore doubts that had long simmered within her. The shift within Emily, never one for confrontation, sat for a long time with the documents spread out on the kitchen table. She watched dust drift in the morning light and listened to her mother hum an old Sinatra song in the living room. She thought of all the times she had stepped aside, unacknowledged birthdays, late-night worries bottled up, the thankless rituals of caretaking that filled her own days. Mary had always been the star, and Emily, quietly, had let her. But this, she realized, was different. Betrayal felt not like a dagger in the back, but a slow tightening in the chest. She felt grief, not just at the possibility that Mary had prioritized her own security, but at the stark, irreversible realization that their once unbreakable bond had been marred by ambition and mistrust. Perhaps, Emily thought, she had been invisible for too long. Quiet resolve and the birth of a plan. In the days that followed, Emily's grief hardened into something sharper, almost steely, a resolve she did not know she possessed. She read and reread the documents, took notes, and, almost mechanically, began researching on her own. Working at a small-town bank had accustomed her to the rhythms and shadows of finance, even if until now she'd used those skills only to preserve what little stability her family could claim. But now, Emily moved differently through her days. She no longer deferred to Mary or waited for instructions. She began examining her father's financial accounts with a fresh eye. She quietly asked colleagues at the bank about the legal nuances of trusts and inheritances, framing her questions as simple curiosities for a friend. She started cataloging the family's assets, real estate, investments, even the old coins their father kept in a safe beneath the floorboards. She was careful, almost surgical, in her investigation. She hid spreadsheets and notes in password-protected files and kept the important documents tucked beneath her winter sweaters. She learned, more quickly than she expected, how to trace digital footprints and how easy it was to miss a single transaction if one wasn't paying attention. Small moves, subtle maneuvers. Emily's plan was not the kind of crude revenge one finds in soap operas or whispered threats. It was artful, slow, and laced with the same grace that had marked her silent years of sacrifice. She did not want to destroy Mary, however much her pride bristled at the betrayal. What Emily wanted was equilibrium, acknowledgement, and, yes, a taste of the power her sister had always wielded with such casual confidence. She started by quietly consolidating her influence with their mother. Emily knew Maria Parker's routine: the morning walks, the prayers spoken on creaking knees, her soft spot for home-cooked meals. Emily spent extra time with her, gently inquiring about household decisions and, more subtly, about her wishes for the family's legacy. She began to take over small financial duties their mother had shared with their father for decades. Maria, weary from stress and grateful for a reliable companion, acquiesced without question. Emily also built bridges with other relatives who had always hovered on the periphery. Cousins who remembered her birthday, her uncle who came by each Sunday evening to watch football. She didn't talk about Mary or the inheritance. Instead, she listened, remembered stories, and quietly became the dependable presence in the ever-shrinking world of their extended family. At work, Emily leveraged her connections for information and counsel. She asked a friendly bank attorney for advice on setting up an irrevocable living trust. On her lunch breaks, she researched power of attorney arrangements in rights of next of kin in Texas law. The more she learned, the more she saw how close she had come to being entirely omitted from her own family's future. The first checkmates. Small victories followed, each one building Emily's confidence. She found an overlooked joint account in her name and her father's, untouched for years. enough for her mother's personal expenses and for emergencies. She flagged an error in the title of the family home, which would have delayed its transfer after her father's passing. These were not acts of sabotage, but of self-preservation. Measured moves on a chessboard she'd only now been invited to play on. Her mother's doctor mentioned, in passing, how much more reliable Emily had become in recent months. The local pastor thanked her for her behind-the-scenes help with the church's accounting. People noticed, and for the first time, so did Mary. A confrontation, and the veil drops. The day came, as it always must, when Mary realized something fundamental had shifted in their family's dynamic. She arrived one Friday, crisp and composed, expecting deference in order as always. Instead, she found her mother trusting Emily with bill payments, relatives calling Emily first for family news, and Emily herself calmly declining to discuss ongoing legal matters with a carefully practiced smile. They met at the kitchen table, just as they had as children. Mary's voice was tight with accusation. Emily's, cool and measured. The conversation, littered with legal jargon and old hurts, ended not with shouting, but with exhausted silence. Mary, for the first time, saw not the quiet, forgettable child, but a formidable opponent, one whose patience could outlast fury, and whose intelligence had grown sharp, not from praise, but from necessity. The sweetest revenge. Revenge for Emily never came as a dramatic public denouement. It was, instead, a righting of balances, regaining lost ground, carving out her own place at the table, and forcing Mary to contend with the reality that her sister was not a simple pawn, but an equal. As months went by and Antonio's health declined, more and more family discussions went through Emily. She became her mother's confidant, was included in every financial meeting, and, bit by bit, won back agency over things that had long been decided for her. For the first time, Emily did not sit out of focus in family photos, nor did she let her voice go unheard. Her spirit, long pressed down, rose up, not in cruelty, but in the quiet thrill of reclaiming herself and proving that love, like inheritance, is not always rewarded to the loudest or the brightest, but sometimes to the one who endures and adapts. And somewhere, beneath the shifting allegiances and the cool, methodical maneuvers, a sorrow flickered, the realization that victory, even the sweetest kind, could never restore what was truly lost between sisters. The relentless war of wits, the Parker household, once held together, if uneasily, by rigid tradition and necessity, had now become a battleground where silent strategy, pride, and hurt feelings replaced the once unspoken bond of sisterhood. Whatever warmth or nostalgia lingered was, for now, sidelined by the unremitting power struggle between Mary and Emily, a contest as chilling as it was inevitable, a stalemate on familiar ground. With their father's condition worsening and the family's affairs coming to a head, the two sisters now faced each other as equals, but not as friends. Each woman moved with a newfound wariness. Decisions, once negotiated informally or left to their parents, were now subjects of formal voting and behind-the-scenes lobbying. Simple tasks, like preparing Sunday supper, morphed into silent power plays. Who would cook? Who would host? Each detail carrying the weight of precedent and unspoken territorial claim. Emily, who once surrendered the spotlight without protest, now wielded her influence deftly. She controlled most of the information flow around their mother and the extended family. Money for groceries, home repairs, and even medical treatments often crossed her desk first, forcing Mary to go through her if she wanted access to the details. Emily's calm, steady presence reassured relatives, and positioned her as the household's new center of gravity. Mary, for her part, was far from outmatched. She drew on years of courtroom experience, understanding how to read a room, how to apply pressure, and, critically, how to leverage her connections. She called in favors from financial advisors and doctors, obtained second legal opinions when necessary, and made sure every decision around their father's estate was thoroughly documented. Contracts and powers of attorney arrived in neat folders, initials and signatures, requested with unyielding politeness. Tactics of the unsaid. Their battles were rarely loud. Both women had learned, from a young age, that in their family, control was not always asserted by force, but often through suggestion, exclusion, or timing. Mary would schedule conference calls with bankers and attorneys at hours she knew Emily was busy at the bank. Emily would forget to leave important documents on the kitchen table when Mary came visiting, causing delays that always seemed like honest mistakes. Relatives were drawn into the fray, sometimes unwittingly, sometimes quite willingly. Their uncle Gianni became the unofficial arbiter of disputes, his presence requested at family meetings, where voices occasionally grew sharp. Cousins took sides, not always with the person they expected. Some admired Mary's ambition, others cherished Emily's constancy. Their mother felt the strain most of all, her health suffering anonymously behind polite smiles in unwavering attempts at peacekeeping. Information as weapon. In this ongoing chess match, information was ammunition. Emily, with her access to the family's day-to-day, knew every detail. When medications needed refilling, which bills were overdue, the names of every nurse and orderly who cycled through the house. Mary, meanwhile, gathered strategic intelligence, future investments, the legal angles of inheritance, and how the latest tax laws would impact the estate. Both sisters kept private records, never fully sharing, never fully trusting. Each conversation became a dance of half-truths and careful disclosures. When Mary suggested selling the childhood home to cover medical costs, Emily countered with news of a local developer interested in a long-term lease, surprising Mary, who prided herself on always knowing more. When Emily proposed a new nurse, Mary revealed that she'd already hired one, impressive credentials and all. Sometimes, their conflict held the embarrassed flavor of sibling rivalry. Beneath the adult negotiation, threads of old jealousy and longing flickered unspoken. But more often now, this was war. Mary demanded efficiency. Emily insisted on compassion. Each suspected the other of acting not for their father's best interests, but out of a desire for approval or vindication for wounds inflicted years earlier. Relentlessly, strategic, gently, ruthless. As weeks passed, their maneuvers grew more subtle, their gamesmanship more refined. Emily began to preempt Mary's arguments by quietly consulting attorneys and social workers on her own, emailing facts and proposals to the family group chat before Mary could draft her long, authoritative messages. She anticipated questions and seeded answers with her perspective, always with a veneer of humility that belied her increasing mastery of family politics. Mary, seeing her authority challenged, recalibrated. Drawing on her professional network, she organized telemedicine consultations with experts across the state and presented detailed care plans, all couched in language that sounded collaborative but made it clear who had the final say. She handled her mother's living will with fastidious care, ensuring that every signature was witnessed and every option explained thoroughly, sometimes to the point of exhaustion. Neither was above small, calculated kindnesses. Mary brought expensive chocolates and rare teas for her mother, but made a point to do it in Emily's absence. Emily arranged for relatives to visit during Mary's busiest weekends, ensuring she was the one present for family moments and small emergencies. Long-forgotten friendships were revived, alliances forged and sometimes broken just as quickly. The ties that frayed. Over time, the struggle between Mary and Emily consumed most of their attention. Evenings that might once have been spent reminiscing or sharing music were now devoted to silent strategizing. They shared a roof and so many memories, but the meaning of family had become tactical. Antonio watched his daughters with quiet sadness from his recliner, sometimes beckoning one or the other for a private word. He recognized in both the steel of his upbringing, but wondered, in rare, lucid moments, if he'd inadvertently taught them too well how to fight, and not well enough how to forgive. Their mother, Maria, meanwhile, lived in constant tension. She longed for a return to old certainties, for the laughter of her children, the sense that, even when times were hard, the family was united. Instead, she witnessed the intricate negotiations, incensed keenly, the distance between those she loved most, a war with no easy winner. Neither Mary nor Emily would admit defeat, not even privately. The cost of conceding ground seemed to rise each day, not only in terms of inheritance or authority, but in their sense of justice, self-worth, and the memory of their childhood vows. Yet winning, too, proved hollow. Every minor triumph reminded them of what had been lost, of what could never be salvaged with clever strategy or legal precision. Occasionally, a gesture revealed the shadow of past affection. Mary's hand resting quietly on Emily's shoulder as they left the hospital, Emily brewing an extra cup of coffee when she knew Mary had a sleepless night. But these moments were quickly buried beneath the next tactical move, the rhythm of defense and advance that defined their lives. Towards an uncertain peace, other relatives, friends, and even neighbors watched with a mix of concern and resignation. The Parker sisters had become a local legend, not just daughters and caretakers, but symbols of stubbornness, survival, and the terrifying, tender complexity of sisterhood. People whispered, debated, and speculated on the outcome, but only the sisters themselves knew the true cost. As Antonio's health entered its final, most fragile phase, the relentless war of wits simmered quietly beneath the surface. The endgame was near, but neither Mary nor Emily knew what victory would look like, or whether, in the striving, they had forgotten what truly mattered most. Changing places, and the miracle of transformation. The Parker household had always been a stage on which duty eclipsed joy, and where the strongest voice, for many years, belonged to Mary. Yet as her father's life faded, and months of strategy gave way to exhaustion, an unexpected shift wound its way into the very bedrock of the family. The relentless war of wits that had driven Mary and Emily apart now left them hollowed, their hearts sensitive to new possibilities. Like the Texas dawn following too many sleepless nights, change, unpredictable and quiet, found its opening. A daughter, recast. Antonio's final days arrived with little ceremony, just the slow surrender of breath, and a house full of restless waiting. It was Emily, not Mary, who rarely left his bedside. She wiped his brow, sang softly to him in the dim hours before dawn, and fielded endless questions from relatives and clergy. In their father's lucid moments, it was Emily he called by name, cupping her hand gently in his wizened palm. Gone were the days when Emily shrank behind her accomplished sister's shadow. Her presence, so often overlooked, became a steady light for those trapped in sorrow or confusion. She coordinated family calls, prepared meals the way their father liked, and quietly handled legal and medical loose ends. Neighbors arrived with casseroles, expecting Mary, but instead saw Emily at the door, facing the world with a gentle strength that surprised everyone, including herself. Mary, meanwhile, found herself frozen by a grief too deep for action. She sat in her parents' battered armchair, fielding condolences she couldn't fully process, her mind darting between memories and regrets. In courtrooms, she had been formidable, her resolve unmovable. Here, in the intimacy of loss, she was small. Her knowledge and confidence did nothing to shield her from private doubts. A family's eyes turned. In the weeks after Antonio's passing, family dynamics recalibrated. Relatives who once vied for Mary's approval now sought Emily's advice. Decisions about the funeral, about which hymns to sing, or which flowers to place on the casket, fell to Emily by tacit consensus. Maria, their mother, leaned on Emily for everything: comfort, prayers, gentle reminders to eat. When neighbors spoke kindly of the Parker daughters, it was Emily's name they repeated. "She's been a blessing. I don't know what we'd have done without her." Mary found herself on the periphery. She did not resent Emily's new role. Not really. She simply struggled to understand how the world could tilt so suddenly, and how the person she'd always believed needed protection now stood strong without her. It was unnerving. At gatherings, she lingered at the edge of the kitchen or stood alone on the back porch, listening to Emily's laughter spill gently from within, as if learning anew the signature of belonging. Lessons in humility. The shift weighed on Mary in ways she could not articulate. In her solitude, she revisited memories of a childhood spent shielding Emily, of promises whispered in darkness, of later years dominated by ambition and a need for control. Regret gnawed at her. Had she mistaken efficiency for love? Had she lost her family's heart while chasing their approval? Emily, for her part, did not press her advantage. The old reflex to defer, to apologize for taking up space, still lingered at the edge of her mind. But sorrow had given her a new clarity, one that valued simple presence above performance. She tended to her mother, corresponded with cousins, and dried her own tears when no one watched. One afternoon, Mary surprised Emily in the kitchen, her voice thin and uncertain. "You've held everything together," she said, awkward in her praise. "I'm sorry, But the apology trailed off, edged with a humility that only grief can teach. Emily smiled, tired, grateful, forgiving not just Mary, but the both of them. "We just did what we could. It wasn't all on you." Forgiveness, tentative but real. The road to reconciliation was neither straight nor fast. The sisters moved cautiously through their days, learning each other's new rhythms and sensitivities. There were still awkward moments, Mary's instinct to lead, Emily's quiet resistance. But increasingly, grace took the place of old resentments. They began to share tasks again. As tentative partners, Mary drafted thank you notes for the funeral. Emily found their addresses. Emily planned a memorial luncheon. Mary coordinated with the church choir. Together, they sorted Antonio's belongings, weeping over old photographs and laughing over forgotten trinkets. It was not the easy companionship of their youth, but something else, harder won and perhaps more enduring. Both understood, finally, that love could be an offering rather than a contest, that strength might be found in listening as much as in leading. A miracle in the ordinary. With Antonio gone, Emily's emerging role within the family brought a quiet transformation. Maria, ailing but deeply peaceful, began to open up to both daughters for the first time, sharing stories of her own girlhood in Italy, teaching them treasured recipes, recounting sacrifices she and Antonio had made just to keep food on the table during lean years. The Parker home, once ruled by rules and rigor, softened noticeably. The siblings noticed it in little things. Sunlight lingering through newly opened curtains. Music played just a little louder. Laughter echoing up the staircase at night. For the first time in decades, the air seemed lighter. Mary, learning anew to receive rather than to direct, discovered a strange relief in vulnerability. She spent more days at home, helping Emily tend the garden or listening quietly as her mother shared tales. She wrote less about her work and more about her father's favorite books. The accolades in Houston, the applause in courtrooms, felt distant. Real belonging, she realized, was found in the ordinariness she'd spent so long escaping. Emily, quiet no longer, found her voice outside the home as well. The local bank promoted her after witnessing her calm in crisis. Soon, she was mentoring younger employees and volunteering for community events. She played the church piano again, every hymn rippling with a strength forged in hardship. The townsfolk's respect was not born of flash or accomplishment, but trust, something only years of gentle care could earn. An open door. By spring, the family, though changed, felt remarkably whole. The sisters' relationship was knit together, not by obligation, but by mutual recognition and acceptance. They no longer spoke of betrayal or blame, but instead of forgiveness and what the future might hold. One morning, while tending roses outside the Parker house, Mary said, almost offhand, "Do you ever think about leaving? About starting over?" Emily
Yes, the
paused,
package is secure.
dirt on her hands, and
The
smiled.
transaction is complete.
"This is my beginning. Right here." She hesitated, then added softly, "If you ever wanted to stay, I think now it would be different." A hush lingered. In that moment, the door to something new. Maybe not the lost innocence of childhood, but a deeper kinship built on understanding. Creaked open. It would not erase the past, but it offered the only miracle that mattered. The chance to love again, bravely and without reservation. A family restored. By summer, Mary and Emily stood side by side as their mother presided over Sunday dinners, their laughter mingling with the neighbors on Willow Lane. The house bore the marks of sorrow, but also of survival and grace. In photos, no one stood in the background. Both daughters, changed but resilient, were centered, arms linked, eyes bright. Forgiveness was never about returning to what had been. Instead, it grew wild in the garden of what was possible, sustained by time, by patience, and by the miracle of two sisters who, having traded places, found themselves in each other anew.